Hello friends, I'm FIDE instructor Atul Dahale and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I am back with something which is very interesting. Today's game is very special because this is the game between Anish Giri and Magnus Carlsen. Two of the rivals, you can say, or friends plus rivals. But this game is very fascinating because in this game Magnus Carlsen outplayed Anish Giri in Endgame. Yes, this is something which we have seen in Magnus Carlsen's game again and again, but the way he played in this game is really fascinating. So without further delay, we are just going to get to the game. But before we start with the game, I would like to tell you that don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you are new here. So the game started with e4. In this game, Magnus Carlsen was black and Anish Giri was white. So Anish Giri started with e4, then e5 was played, knight of 3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. Well, this is the Geico piano opening. We all know this is a very common theory, we can say, nowadays. Castling was done, then knight of 6, d3. Well, there are other alternatives are also there where you play c3 followed by d4 is one of the ideas, but we know that in Italian Italian game, d3 d6 is very common, and in order to stop the ideas related to bishop g4 and knight d4, white usually plays c3, and that is what Anish Giri played in this position. And now h6. Well, this kind of a coffee house move is nowadays becoming very standard because there are two things which you need to understand in this kind of positions. One thing is h6 is played not only just to block bishop g5, but also at some point if you want to create any chances on the king side, then we can go for g5 g4 and black will be having some chances on that side of the board, and which is a very common technique or method which is adopted by back players in this position. So white played knight d2, bringing the piece in the game, castles, okay, then rook e1. Okay, he is not having any ideas related to g5 anymore, so he just castles in the position, rook e1, and now now in order to stop b4, he plays a5. Obviously now b4 is no longer possible. And one more thing is also there, that after a5 b4 is stopped, but also we have created one square for our bishop that is going to be there on a7 square. So white played knight of 1, very standard idea. Knight wants to go to g3 or e3 to control these important squares on the king side. Okay, so now bishop e6 was played by Magnus Carlsen, bishop b5. Usually they don't exchange the piece, either they go back or play bishop b5. And now you can play different moves here in this position, but why to give your opponent good pawn structure? Like, means he will be having good pawn structure and you will be having bad pawn structure. If you are going for like rook e8 or something like that, then if this happens, then black's pawn structure will be little bit bad. And Magnus Carlsen is a player who will never go for bad pawn structure. So he plays knight e7, just the way white is trying to get his knight to the other side of the board, that is on the king side. He is also getting ready for this thing. And one more thing I would like to tell you, that at some point if d5 is played, then also this knight will be the one who will be supporting the d5 square. Okay, so knight e7, d4, attacking the bishop. So bishop goes back to a7 square. And now, okay, here if you capture on d4, then white will be getting a very strong center, and that is not something which Carlsen wants in this position. So he goes back to a7 square, which is a predetermined square for the bishop, you can say. And now d into e5. Now you may say that why did he give up one pawn? Because if he just go for this thing, then after queen into d8, rook into d8, knight into e5, he is losing the pawn in this position. So what might be the thing behind all these things? But I will tell you, after, let's suppose d into e5, he planned to play knight g4. Why knight g4? Because now he is attacking the pawn on f2 as well as the pawn on e5, and black is okay here because white doesn't have this option, because then we will play bishop into f2 followed by bishop into e1, and the position will be in black's favor. So that is not a possibility. So white played bishop e3 in order to just exchange this beautifully placed bishop, but Magnus Carlsen will not exchange this bishop. He played knight into e3. He is ready to give up one pawn. I am going to show you. Okay, here if you want to save the pawn, okay, then the moves like bishop into e3, knight into e3, knight into e5, and black will save the pawn. But why to save the pawn when you are going to have a good position? That is what Magnus Carlsen thought in this position, because he is trying to create his own counter chances by playing knight into e3. He wants to retain the bishop on a7 on the board. Okay, knight into e3 and now d into e5. Okay, he is giving up the pawn, but now but now in this position he played knight g6. If you have ever seen the game between Spassky and Fischer, in that he plays knight g6 in Nimzo Indian Opening, and he opens up the f file and gets the initiative, and then he went on to win the game. That was one of the openings which or the positions which I still remember. Same way Magnus Carlsen is applying that technique here. He is playing knight g6, is allowing his opponent to double the pawns on the g6 square, but after queen into d8, rook into d8, if you take a stock of the position, then you will see that this rook is having a very free hand on the d file. Another thing is that this rook's f file is now opened up, and this bishop is also having a good diagonal. One more thing you can see, the bishop on e6 is doing an excellent job sitting in the center of the board and controlling on both the sides. So you can say that although black is the one who is pawn down in this position, his pawn structure is also not good, but his pieces are excellently placed, and that is what determines who is having better position in this particular thing or not. Here I will prefer this position playing from the black side any day, because I have the piece activity. Okay, so Anish Giri played rook e2, trying to just stop this rook's activity, which is going to be rook to the d2 square. And now Magnus Carlsen took a very committal decision, I will say. He played bishop into e3 because he understood that this bishop on e6 is much more superior than the bishop on b5, because it is controlling more squares, and this bishop on a7 is not doing that great job now. It should be exchanged, because if the knight comes in the center of the board, let's suppose knight d5 comes at some point, then knight will be very, very strong, and that is not something which he wants in the position. So he exchanges the knight, and now white is in dilemma what he should be doing. He has two choices. One is like playing rook into e3, which was the best move in the position, and another is like playing f into a3 and ruining the pawn structure. And I will say that this is what was played in the game, f into e3, and it all changed after this. But rook into e3 was excellent move, and after that the game would have been slightly equal. I will say rook e2 is the best move. Now if rook d8 is played, then white has the only move to be there in the game, that is king f1. Maybe Anish Giri did not want to go in that position, so rook d1, then rook into d1, rook e1, and the game can be drawn if he wants to, and that is what is there. But he did not go for this thing. He played f into e3, and now Magnus Carlsen started his real game. From this movement onwards, Magnus Carlsen played in amazing fashion. He took slight advantage of each and every move, and then he capitalizes on white's weaknesses in the camp. Okay, he is pawn down, but his piece activity is going to show why he is having better chances. So here he played king f7. Now bishop a4 was played, king e7. Obviously you need to bring your king in the end game. That is very, very important. That's why he brings the king in the game. Now h3. All the possibilities of bishop g4 are not stopped, because if you are going to play rook d1, the bishop should not be annoying to you. That's why he played that move. And now bishop c4, a good move, attacking the rook, because rook is the main defender in this position. You can see the rook on a1 is not playing in the game, and by playing bishop c4, what is happening? Okay, this rook needs to move. He moved to rook c2, but now the bishop is controlling the f1 square, so there is no possibility of playing rook f1 and exchanging the rooks on the board. Okay, that is the one thing. And one more thing is that the pawns on e3 and e4 are pretty weak, and Magnus Carlsen goes for those pawns slowly and gradually. First he plays rook to d3, attacking the pawn on e3. Now he develops his rook e1, he defends the pawn, and now he brings the king here on d6. Okay, king e6 is also one of the moves, but after bishop b3, it is kind of like you need to exchange the bishops, and he doesn't want to go in that situation, so he plays king d6. Okay, bishop b3, and now this is the choice which he has. He can come back to a6 square. Okay, if we exchange the bishops, then I will say that the position might be little bit equal, or you can say that white will get some chances to even exchange more number of pieces, because now you can play rook f2 or maybe rook f1, and if you exchange one pair of rook, then rook endgames are more of like drawish nature. So usually when you have a little bit better position, then try to retain more pieces on the board. Okay, don't just convert the game into the rook endgame if it is completely dry. So bishop a6 is played, rook c1, and now king comes into center of the board. Look at the difference between the kings here. The king which was sitting on g8 square, now it is brought to e5 square, a very commandable square in the center of the board. Okay, so you should understand this thing. When you are playing the end game, then king becomes a very important piece for you, because whoever has the active king, that side must be having better chances, and that's what we are going to see here. He played rook c d1, then rook f d8. It is very necessary to control the d file. Okay, rook into d3, and now he plays bishop into d3. Well, rook into d3, you might say like this might be one of the moves, but I will say that if you play, then rook f1 might be one of the good moves, followed by rook f7 is coming, and once the rook comes on the 7th rank, then you will get plenty of chances to draw the game. So that is not something which he wants, so he plays bishop into d3, still controlling the f1 square. Okay, so king f2, bringing the king in the game. Now he plays rook d6, then bishop d1. This bishop wants to come somewhere maybe on f3 or g4. He plays bishop c4, attacking the pawn on a2. b3 is played in order to support the pawn. First he gives the check, king goes to g3 square, and now he plays bishop e6. It's not necessary to maintain the square, that is f1 now, because we are controlling f7, and bishop is also good on this square because it is controlling on both the sides. Okay, now rook f1 is played. Magnus Carlsen captures the pawn on a2, and now bishop g4. Okay, here Giri was already in big time trouble, that's why he played bishop g4, and now he misses the pawn like on b3. So bishop into b3 was played, and it is just over for Giri. The way the game was ended was also very instructive. I'll just show you. Rook f8 was played, then he played king into e4. Now he takes the pawn. Until now, I'll just show you, until now he did not even touch the pawn on e4, because if you capture the pawn on e4 at any moment, then bishop f3 check and the pawn on b7 was hanging. So he doesn't go for those things. He plays very simple chess, like he captures the main pawns which are more important for him, because central pawns are not going anywhere. They are like there for him only. So he captures the other pawns and creates his own passed pawn. Rook f8 is played. Now king into e4, rook c8, and now he captures king into e3. Rook into c7. The pawn on b7 needs to be protected, because if you leave the pawn on b7 just like that, then the c pawn might be the one who will be proceeding in this position. So he plays bishop d5, supporting the pawn on b7. Also, the threat of rook into g2 is there on the board, so bishop f3 is played in order to parry that threat. He captures g into f3, and now he plays rook b2. This is a very important thing, like he is not ready to give any counter play to Anish Giri, which is a very nice thing. Rook into g7 is played, and now rook behind the passed pawn, which we have learnt many times in the textbooks, and that is what Magnus Carlsen does. Here Anish Giri is threatening rook into g6 and creating some counter play because he can get some passed pawn or something like that, but Carlsen says no more counter play for my opponent. I am pawn up in this position, my pawn is a passed pawn, I'll just put my rook behind the passed pawn, I'll keep on pushing the pawn. That's what he had decided. So c4, king d4. Again you can see the king from the white side is not participating in the game. Okay, that is the main difference in whole game. The king's activity is very important. So rook c7, he pushes his pawn, because it is said like when you have a passed pawn, you should push that pawn. It is a must thing. c5, rook behind the passed pawn. Now he captures this pawn, and there should not be any counterplay, right? So he simply captures this pawn, and game is almost over. Rook c7 check, king b6, no more checks, rook needs to go, then a3, rook means pawn h4. Now again in this position Magnus Carlsen plays very precisely. I'll show you what he played. a2, the rook is like needs to come on a1 square, and now he plays rook a4, stopping all the counter play. The king is not having any squares to come in the game. Okay, now f4, and the players which are mere mortals you can say, they will make some mistakes. They will try to go here and capture the rook and something. It might give chances for white, but Magnus Carlsen is not that of a player. He says like, okay, the pawn on a2 is there, the rook is stuck, I don't need to capture the rook. All I need to capture is other pawn, create a second passed pawn and win the game. And that's what he did. He played h5, blocking all the pawns there. King f3. Now he calmly brings the king in the game. King e3, and after king d5, king f3, king e6. Here Anish Giri decided to resign the game, because if you play king e3, then king f5 is coming. If you play this move, he will just capture with the check. Wherever the king moves, he will again come back here, and on the next move he will create his own passed pawn. The king needs to be stuck here to support the pawn, and then in meantime he can come here and okay, he will win the game. So this was a beautiful demonstration by Magnus Carlsen. How he played is clearly very much fascinating. After this position, I will say it was just amazing the way Magnus Carlsen. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have enjoyed, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you are new here. So we will meet with something more interesting in the next video. Till then, take care, goodbye, and love you all. Bye bye.